Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. During the time of Eesa alayhi salam, the Hawariyun, or the disciples of Jesus, were upon the religion of monotheism, true Islamic Tawheed, and they believed in Eesa alayhi salam and all of the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, including the messenger to come, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, based on what they had found in the revelation and what they were told by Eesa alayhi salam. Not long after the removal of Eesa alayhi salam from this world, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took him up into the heavens, the Muslims at that time, as we would call them, or the early Christians as they may be known to others, they began to spread. The religion of Eesa alayhi salam, however, as it was during his time, did not last very long. And this is due to people like Paul and others who introduced different types of innovations and other beliefs that contradict the belief of Eesa alayhi salam as it was revealed. Additionally, the book which was revealed to Eesa, the Injil, was no longer found. There were other Anajil, other Gospels that were around, but the actual Gospel of Eesa alayhi salam, of Jesus, which would have been in his original language or in the language of revelation, was not found. By the time we reach 300 years after Esa's time, we find that many Christians have already accepted the Trinity as their main belief. Some 300 years after that, or 6 centuries after the time of Eesa alayhi salam, would be the time of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And at this point, the majority of Christians would be as we know them today. And this leads to an interesting question. What happened to the last Christians who were actually upon the correct belief, the belief of Eesa alayhi salam as he left this world? This leads us to the stories of 2 individuals. One of them is Salman al-Farisi, who would be at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and another individual who would be slightly before the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or perhaps sometime before the advent of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We are not exactly sure the correct timing of this individual, but his name is Feymioon. Ibn Ishaq mentions 2 stories concerning Fimon in his book of Seerah, and the first of them takes place in Sham, or the Levant. It begins with Feymioon traveling from place to place. Something that we will see is his custom. Feymioon is an individual who is one of the last people upon the religion of Eesa alayhi salam. He is a full monotheist. He believes in Tawheed, the Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he's an individual who is very devout in his worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because of this, he has gained this status with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whereby if he makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah answers his dua. This causes Feymioon to become somewhat secluded, because he does not want other people to know that Allah will answer his dua whenever he makes dua. He does not want this to be abused. He does not want to be used by other people. Perhaps these are some of the things that cross his mind. But what we know is that Feymioon begins to travel and never settles in a place for too long. Ibn Ishaq mentions that he goes from village to village, and he stays in a village until he becomes known or recognized, and then he moves on to another village. At some point in his life, Feymioon ends up settling in a particular village for some time. Feymioon was by trade a builder. He was what seems to be someone who used to make bricks out of mud, and Allah knows best, but it seems that he had other skills as well in carpentry or building and fixing and the likes of these things. Feymioon would work by his hands. He would go out, do whatever work he needed to do, and he would spend his free time in the countryside, away from the village, out in the fields and places that were away from people, and he would spend his days worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whenever he did not have work to do. There was a particular man by the name of Salih who began observing Feymioon, and he discovered that Feymioon was someone who used to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Salih became very intrigued by Feymioon's worship. He started following Feymioon discreetly. He didn't want to be discovered by Feymioon, but he was amazed at his worship, and observing Feymioon engage in salah, in his prayer and his worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Salih began to love this individual for the righteousness that he upheld and his righteous character. So Salih had a lot of respect for Feymioon and a lot of love for him, as a believer loves a believer. And he would, as mentioned before, follow Feymioon around discreetly without Feymioon noticing, so that he could observe this worship that he loved to see so much. During one such occasion, Feymioon is out in a field and he's worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Salih has followed him out to this field, and he is hiding in a place where Feymioon cannot see him, and he is watching Feymioon worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in amazement, when all of a sudden he notices a big snake heading towards Feymioon. Salih is afraid for Feymioon's life. He is afraid that something will happen to Feymioon. He also does not want to be discovered by Feymioon. He doesn't want Feymioon to know that he's been watching him. However, as the snake continues to approach, he has no choice but to shout out, "Feymioon, there is a snake coming towards you." What Salih does not know, however, is that Feymioon had already spotted the snake, and Feymioon began making dua against the snake. Feymioon made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and before the snake could touch him, the snake fell dead in its place. However, Salih has already shouted out to him, and Feymioon has already heard the shout. So Feymioon now understands and knows that Salih has been following him. Salih sees the snake die and begins to understand that Feymioon made dua against it, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered this dua. Of course, this increases Salih's love for Feymioon and love for this righteousness, but now he has to face Feymioon and explain to him what's been happening. So he goes and he speaks to Feymioon, and he explains to him, he excuses himself for his behavior, that he's been secretly following him around, and he explains to Feymioon that I only did so because of my love for your worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and thereby my love of you as a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Feymioon explains to him that what you see is what I am, there's nothing more than this, I simply worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Salih wants to learn more from Feymioon. Feymioon allows him then to follow him around. The people of the village begin to notice something about Feymioon, and Salih himself, of course, notices this as well. We can safely assume from the context of the story, and that is that if someone is sick and Feymioon happens to come across that sick person, that person gets better. And this is because Feymioon makes dua for someone who's sick when he comes across this individual. However, if someone requests Feymioon to come and make dua for him, Feymioon will not come. And this is, of course, as we mentioned before, because Feymioon does not want the people to know of his dua being answered. But at the same time, he is a righteous, soft-hearted individual, And if he sees someone in need, he tends to make dua for them out of his natural feeling of pity for them and wanting good for the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the story, as this progresses, we come across an individual who has a son that is blind or very weak in sight, and effectively being blind. This individual begins to ask about Feymioon. He wants Feymioon to make dua for him, but he wants to find out more about Feymioon. So he asks the people of the village, and he comes to find out that whenever Feymioon is invited to a place, he will not show up. But if Feymioon is asked to work, then he will come and work for compensation. So this individual, he comes up with an idea. He invites Feymioon to come over to his house to work. He tells Feymioon that he needs something done in his house, and he would like Feymioon to come and give him an estimate. He takes his son, who is blind, and he places him in a room and covers him with a cloth. Feymioon agrees to go to the man's house. The man takes him in. Feymioon asks him, "What is it exactly you want done to your house?" And the man begins to talk. "I need this and this done." And he leads him into the room where the boy is hiding underneath the thobe or the cloth, and then he suddenly removes the cloth in front of Feymioon. The boy standing there or sitting there blind in front of Feymioon, and the father is there in the room. He begins to plead with Feymioon, make dua for him. Feymioon makes dua for the boy, and the boy all of a sudden is completely cured of his blindness. He is able to see. However, Feymioon now realizes that he has been discovered, and it's time to pack up and leave. Feymioon leaves the village, and he is accompanied by Saleh. They continue their travel, and on the way they come across a large tree with a man who is inside, and he says that he's been waiting for Feymioon to come. He says, and he requests of Feymioon, "Do not leave. I have been waiting for you, so do not leave until I come down, and I want you to pray for me because I'm about to die." The man comes down from the tree and he dies on the spot. Feymioon then prays for him. He gives him his funeral rites and buries him. Feymioon and Saleh continue their travel until they reach Arabia. They are now in the land of the Arab, and they are soon abducted by a caravan that is passing by. This caravan abducts them and sells them into slavery. They are taken to Najran, where they are sold. The people of Najran at this point in time are idolaters. They are upon the religion of shirk, ascribing partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Feymioon is sold to one noble individual of a particular house, and Saleh is sold to another. These people know nothing of the religion of Eesa alayhi salam, nothing of Islam or pure monotheism. They are, as mentioned, idolaters. But Feymioon is allowed to have a place in the house where he resides, and at night he takes up himself in prayer. People begin to notice that when it is dark at night, there is a light emitted from this house. The master of Feymioon in particular notices this light, and he asks Feymioon about his religion. He observes that Feymioon spends the night in prayer. Feymioon tells him that this thing that you worship, and it happened that the people of that village in particular worshipped a tree. He said that this tree that you worship cannot help you, it cannot harm you, it does nothing for you, and that I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says that if I were to ask Allah to destroy this tree of yours, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would destroy it. So the man says, then do so, and I will enter into your religion. So Feymioon makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Suddenly there is a strong wind that begins to pick up. The wind completely removes the tree, it uproots it and destroys it. The people are now amazed. The master of Feymioon enters into Islam. He accepts the religion, and the rest of the people around them soon follow. The people of Najran, particularly in this area, begin adopting the religion of Eesa عليه السلام as it was, pure Islamic monotheism. However, it is not long, unfortunately, until the innovation and deterioration that entered into the other groups of Christians around the world begins to enter upon the people of Najran.